Imagine this. You meet someone, and it feels like electricity wrapped in silence. They don't say much, but their absence says everything. They're mysterious, unreadable, maybe even a little distant, but that only pulls you in deeper. They give just enough to keep you wondering, hoping, aching. And when they retreat again, as they always do, your heart doesn't let go. It holds tighter. You tell yourself you're just being patient, that you see something in them others can't, that if you just love them enough, wait long enough, heal enough, they'll finally open up. But what if they never do? What if the very thing you redrawn to is the thing that's slowly destroying you? You've likely felt this magnetic pull before, toward someone who doesn't fully see you. Or if they do, they can't seem to stay. You rationalize their coldness. You mistake detachment for depth and inconsistency for complexity. You say things like, they've been hurt, or they just need time, or even worse, maybe it's me. But what if none of those explanations are true? What if the real reason you keep falling for people who can't love you back lies not in them, but deep inside you? And not just inside your conscious thoughts, but in the unseen architecture of your psyche, buried in the shadows of your past, encoded in the blueprint of your emotional survival. Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." What if what you call chemistry is actually an ancient psychological wound repeating itself? What if you're not choosing emotionally unavailable people, but being chosen by something much older, much deeper, and much more unconscious than you realize? Ask yourself, why does someone's emotional distance feel familiar? Why does unpredictability feel exciting? Why do you keep mistaking tension for passion, or silence for depth? And here's the harder question. Why does genuine, healthy love often feel boring, unfamiliar, even unsafe? There's a paradox buried inside the human psyche. We chase what hurts and run from what heals. You weren't born this way. This was shaped, crafted, slowly, quietly. Likely when you were too young to even name what was happening. Someone, perhaps many people, taught you how love feels. Not in the way they said, "I love you," but in how present they were, and how they came close, then disappeared, and how affection had strings attached, and how you had to earn attention, or perform for approval, or shrink to avoid rejection. That blueprint became your internal compass. And now, even as an adult, you keep navigating toward the same magnetic north. You say you want connection, but you're drawn to emotional hunger. You say you crave security, but chase intensity. And worse, when someone actually offers you stability, presence, and emotional availability, something inside you recoils. It doesn't feel right. It doesn't feel like love. It feels foreign. Why? Because the subconscious doesn't crave what is good for you. It craves what is familiar. So ask yourself, is your heart drawn to healing or to repetition? Carl Jung understood this deeply. He believed that the unconscious mind, especially the parts we repress, what he called the shadow, has an almost mythic influence on our behaviors, especially in relationships. It chooses for us. It sabotages for us. It selects the people who mirror our inner wounds, not because it hates us, but because it's trying to bring those wounds to light. You are not simply attracted to emotionally unavailable people. A part of you is seeking reunion with the part of yourself you abandoned long ago. And this unsettling truth is where the journey begins. So the real question isn't, why do they keep leaving? It's, why does this kind of love feel like home? And if love feels like a battlefield, what does that say about where you learn to fight? There is a hidden architecture beneath your longing, beneath your desires, your heartbreak, your hopes. Beneath your romantic patterns is a sacred map written in emotional scars and psychic symbols. Jung called it the process of individuation, the long, often painful path of becoming whole. But before you can heal it, you have to see it. Before you can love freely, you have to know who it is inside you that keeps falling in love with absence. This is not about blaming you. This is about understanding you. Because you are not broken, you are patterned, and every pattern has a root. So let's go there. Let us dig beneath the surface of heartbreak and chemistry and find the origin point of this haunting attraction. Let's uncover the hidden forces, psychological, philosophical, and emotional, that are pulling the strings. Because only when you understand why the wound seeks the wound can you stop calling it love. It starts early, so early, in fact, that you may not even remember it. Not the moment you learned love had to be earned. Not the moment you felt emotionally invisible. Not the moment you first internalized that presence was conditional and affection came with a price. And yet, your body remembers. Your nervous system remembers. And most of all, your unconscious mind remembers. Carl Jung understood the terrifying truth. What we repress doesn't disappear. It governs us from the shadows. And nowhere is this more true than in our romantic lives. You were born with an innate desire to bond, to connect, to be seen. But if your earliest caregivers were emotionally inconsistent, distant, or overwhelmed themselves, that bond became complicated. You learned that closeness could be dangerous. That vulnerability could be used against you. That needing too much made people leave, so you adjusted. You learned to chase love that retreats, to confuse longing with connection, to feel most alive when someone is just out of reach. And here's the sinister part, because the mind seeks coherence more than comfort, you began to call this chaos love. The philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer once argued that romantic desire is not a free act of the will, but rather the unconscious working through us to reproduce a kind of metaphysical pattern. Jung built on this with a psychological lens. He believed that many of our relationships are not chosen consciously, but are manifestations of unconscious archetypes and repressed emotional complexes. You don't just like someone. You are magnetically pulled into a mythic drama already written deep in your psyche. You are drawn to the unavailable, not because it makes sense, but because it matches the emotional landscape of your past. And so you mistake familiarity for destiny. This is not about weakness. It's about psychological wiring. Jean-Paul Sartre once said, "We are our choices." But what if our choices are shaped by what we cannot see? What if the very freedom we pride ourselves on is compromised by the emotional templates we've inherited? We like to think of trauma as a violent rupture, a car crash, an assault, a war. But the most insidious trauma is often quiet, soft-spoken, and chronic. It's the subtle neglect, the look that never came, the silence in moments you needed words, the disapproval you felt for simply being too much or not enough. And this trauma doesn't scream. It whispers. It shapes who you trust, what you desire, and who you keep chasing, long after the original wound is gone. This is the hidden problem. You are not falling in love. You are reenacting a survival script. Jung saw the psyche as a dynamic interplay between opposites, the conscious and unconscious, the persona and the shadow, the self and the other. When these opposites are out of balance, we live fragmented lives. And in relationships, that fragmentation becomes a mirror. You are drawn to those who reflect back the pieces of you that are unintegrated. You fall for people who won't fully see you, because a part of you has never fully seen yourself. You seek out emotional hunger, because your inner child is still standing at a locked door, waiting for it to open. But here's the cruel irony. The more unavailable they are, the more real it feels. Not because they your soulmate, but because your soul still believes that if you can finally win the love of someone who won to love you, you'll prove your worth once and for all. It's not romantic. It's not fated. It's repetition. It's psychological reenactment. It's the past disguised as possibility. Now enter society. Modern culture glorifies emotional unavailability. We romanticize aloofness, idolize mystery, and treat detachment as power. The emotionally avoidant become the protagonists of novels and Netflix dramas. We're told love should hurt, that it should be a battle, that only the worthy survive. And so even when someone finally offers softness, presence, and availability, we don't know what to do with it, because it doesn't fit the narrative, because it doesn't ignite our nervous system into chaos, because love, real love, is sometimes so still, so unassuming, that we miss it entirely. And so we return to what we know, to the anxious highs and devastating lows, to the chase, to the withdrawal, to the fantasy. And we call it passion. But what if it's not passion? What if it's a wound romanticized? Carl Jung would argue that your attraction is not just about the other person. It's about the archetype they awaken in you. The unavailable lover, the elusive muse, the wounded hero. These are not just characters, they are inner realities. Psychological symbols, unfinished stories waiting for resolution. And you are trapped inside one. Viktor Frankl, the existential psychiatrist, once wrote that between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose. But until you become aware of your unconscious drivers, that space remains invisible. And without that awareness, you're not choosing love. You're being chosen by your pain. So the question becomes, can you pause long enough to see the pattern? Can you become conscious of what you once had to repress just to survive? Can you stop calling the wound home? The good news, if we can call it that, is this. Whatever is buried in the unconscious longs to be seen. And it will use whatever means necessary, heartbreak, obsession, longing, to get your attention. Because at its core, this isn't really about them. It's about you. The unavailable person is a mirror, a symbol, an emotional GPS, pointing you back to the place inside you that still believes you have to fight for love. But what happens when you finally realize you don't? They say time heals everything. But what if time only deepens the pattern? What if, in the absence of awareness, the wounds don't dissolve, they evolve? Imagine this. You're not in a relationship right now, but you still feel tethered to someone who once was barely there. Someone who never fully opened, never fully stayed, but never fully left either. Weeks or even years may have passed, yet the ghost of that person still lives inside your nervous system. Not as a memory, but as a lingering question. Why wasn't I enough? That's the hidden consequence. Not just a broken heart, but a fractured self-concept. Not just grief, but chronic self-doubt. Carl Jung would argue that we project onto others the contents of our unconscious, especially the parts we haven't dared to face. And when we love people who remain emotionally distant, we often pour our most sacred qualities into them. Our empathy, imagination, trust, tenderness. They become carriers of our own disowned beauty. So when they leave, it feels like we vanish with them. But this goes far beyond romance. Repeated attraction to emotionally unavailable partners shapes more than our relationships. It becomes a lens through which we see the world. Slowly, subtly, this dynamic warps your beliefs about love, worth, and reality itself. You begin to think love is something scarce, conditional, something you must perform for, prove yourself for, something that only comes in fleeting, agonizing moments before slipping away again. And when you internalize this belief, it doesn't just stay in your personal life, it spills into every corner of your identity. You may become hyper-independent, afraid to need anyone, or you may overfunction in relationships, trying to fix others as a way to earn connection. You may learn to withhold your true feelings to avoid being too much. You may start chasing achievement as a substitute for love. All the while, a quiet ache follows you, unnamed, misunderstood, and invisible to most. This is where the psychological meets the neurological. From a neuroscience perspective, repeated emotional experiences, especially those involving abandonment, anxiety, An inconsistency, literally, wire the brain to expect and seek out similar dynamics. The brain becomes addicted not to pleasure, but to predictability. And if chaos is what your nervous system knows, then chaos is what it will crave. This is why you can know intellectually that someone is bad for you and still feel magnetically pulled toward them. It's not logic. It's not weakness. It's programming. It's why when someone emotionally safe enters your life, they might feel boring or too nice or like something's missing. Because safety feels unfamiliar. And in the absence of familiarity, the nervous system sounds the alarm. This doesn't feel like love, it whispers. And so you pull away. You sabotage. You leave first. And then you wonder why you're always alone. This dynamic is so widespread that it becomes cultural. We glamorize toxicity and downplay emotional intelligence. We call chaos romantic, and we confuse obsession with intimacy. We create entire dating cultures based on ambiguity, detachment, and emotional games. Look at the media. The cold, mysterious figure is always the object of desire. The emotionally unavailable partner is portrayed as deep, tortured, alluring. We don't celebrate the ones who are emotionally mature. We call them too easy. We idolize winning them over, as if love is a battlefield with winners and losers. And what message does this send? That love is something you must earn. That pain is proof of passion. That if it doesn't hurt, it isn't real. And so generation after generation walks straight into emotional starvation, believing it's a feast. This is no longer just about your past. It's about the collective human story. A society that represses vulnerability breeds people who chase unavailable partners. A culture that devalues emotional education creates individuals who confuse suffering with depth. Jung called this psychic inflation, the process by which unconscious forces shape entire social norms, unchecked and undetected. And right now, we are inflated with illusions about love. We have confused it with power, performance, and pain. So what happens next? If we don't become conscious of these forces, we carry them into everything we touch, our friendships, our parenting, our careers. We pass on the template of love equals unavailability to our children, often without realizing it. We teach them through modeling that love is something inconsistent, something earned, something that might hurt. We don't just repeat the pattern. We become it. And here's the final irony. Those who chronically love the unavailable often become emotionally unavailable themselves. Not out of malice, but out of protection. After enough heartbreak, your nervous system builds walls. You become guarded, detached, and then you are the one who cannot receive love when it's offered. The wound circles back, and in this cycle, nobody wins. Everyone becomes a ghost. Reaching, retreating, longing, withholding, together, yet alone. But what if you could see this pattern? Not from within, but from above. What if you could interrupt the story mid-sentence? What if you could stop mistaking intensity for intimacy? Carl Jung believed that healing begins with awareness. And awareness begins with a confrontation with yourself, with your shadow, with the stories you inherited but never questioned. So confront this. What if love has always been there, but you were too wounded to receive it? What if you weren't cursed, but conditioned? What if the unavailability you crave is just a mirror of your own emotional exile? That's the unseen consequence. It's not just about attraction. It's about identity. About the self you abandon every time you try to win someone who won't stay. But here's the turning point. If this pattern was created, it can be uncreated. And not by chasing someone else, but by turning inward. By reclaiming the parts of you that believed pain was proof. By unlearning what love is not. By finally becoming emotionally available to yourself. And that is where the rebellion begins. It begins in silence. Not the silence of being ignored or forgotten, but the silence of a turning point, when you finally sit with yourself long enough to ask the question you've spent your whole life avoiding. What if it was never about them? This is where the rebellion begins. Not with anger, not with blame, but with the quiet, defiant act of shining a light on the unconscious machinery running your life, of calling the pattern by its true name and choosing not to follow it anymore. Carl Jung believed the most radical thing a person can do is to face the contents of their own unconscious. That is the true rebellion, turning inward in a world that constantly tells you to chase something outward. And so, here is your first act of rebellion. Stop chasing ghosts. When someone withholds love, when they dangle connection just out of reach, your instinct may be to lean in harder, to explain yourself, to prove your worth. But rebellion means standing still, watching the urge rise without responding to it. Not because you don't care, but because you've finally learned you don't need to beg for what is already yours. Here's a radical truth. You don't need to earn love. You only need to receive it. And to do that, you must become the kind of person who no longer feels at home in starvation. This requires a full psychological reorientation, a rewriting of the map, and it's not easy. When you start rejecting emotional unavailability, something strange happens. You'll feel lonely. Not because you're alone, but because you're detoxing from a familiar poison. Chaos had become your comfort. Withdrawal had become your ritual. The dance of unpredictability had become your intimacy. You'll grieve, not just the person, but the pattern. You'll grieve the version of yourself that believed you had to be more lovable, more patient, more forgiving, more whatever. It was never about being more. It was always about being seen. That grief is sacred. Honor it. And then, step 2, learn the language of healthy love. It won't feel natural at first. You'll find yourself doubting people who show up, questioning those who are consistent, thinking they're boring, too available, too into you. But pause, breathe, ask yourself, is this unfamiliar because it's wrong or because it's new? Remember, your nervous system doesn't crave what's good for you. It craves what's familiar. And healing means introducing new familiarity, new safety, new internal associations. Train your body to see calm as safe, not dull. To see availability as strength, not weakness. To see honesty as intimacy, not danger. This isn't just psychological, it's neurological. New experiences of love, care, and presence literally rewire your brain. Neuroplasticity means your patterns are not permanent. But you must expose yourself, again and again, to the thing you once feared most, being seen, your wholeness. That brings us to the next step, do shadow work. Jungian shadow work is the process of reclaiming the parts of yourself you've repressed, denied, or disowned. And here's the paradox. The more you reject your own emotional needs, the more you're drawn to people who reject them too. But when you begin integrating your shadow, when you allow yourself to feel need, express desire, hold boundaries, and admit vulnerability, something powerful happens. You no longer settle for those who refuse to meet you there. You stop mistaking neglect for mystery. You stop labeling chaos as chemistry. You stop identifying with being not enough. Instead, you begin to stand inside your wholeness. You become emotionally sovereign. And sovereignty is magnetic not to the unavailable, but to those who are ready. There's one more act of rebellion, perhaps the most difficult. Stop trying to fix others as a way to fix yourself. If you're drawn to broken people because you believe love will heal them, ask yourself, who are you really trying to rescue? Often, it's a younger version of you. A child who watched someone she loved walk away again and again. A child who made it mean something about her worth. A child who believed that if she could just make them stay, it would prove she was lovable all along. But that child doesn't need someone else's love to be healed. She needs yours. Speak to her. hold her. Let her grieve the love she didn't get. Let her rage against the unfairness. Let her exist not as a burden, but as a sacred part of your becoming. Carl Jung called this the individuation process, becoming whole by integrating all your parts, not just the ones the world praises. It is the most courageous journey you will ever take. And here's the miracle. When you do this work, your attractions begin to shift. Slowly, subtly, but powerfully. The thrill of the unavailable no longer excites you. It drains you. The person who plays games no longer makes your heart race. They make your stomach turn. Because your body now recognizes the difference between a trauma bond and true connection. And in that recognition, you are free. You're no longer reacting from a place of absence. You're responding from a place of presence. That is real power. This rebellion isn't loud. It won't be celebrated in movies. It won't win you admiration from people still addicted to their own patterns. But it will change everything. You will walk differently, speak differently, choose differently. And most importantly, you will finally meet the one person you've been searching for in every unavailable partner. Yourself. The one who stays. The one who sees. The one who is never too much and never not enough. What if I told you that the great love you've been chasing was never someone else? What if the ache in your chest, the longing, the hunger, the desperation for someone to choose you was never about romance at all? What if it was your soul, asking you to come home? Here lies the final, most powerful realization, the one that Carl Jung circled his entire life around, the one that haunts the edges of every broken heart and every unspoken wound. You are not seeking love. You are seeking reunion with the parts of yourself you left behind to survive. And every emotionally unavailable person you've ever chased, they were just symbols, shadows, mirrors. They appeared in your life not to fulfill your longing, but to reveal it. Because what you call chemistry is often the collision of two unhealed wounds. What you call destiny is often a reenactment of a childhood heartbreak. And what you call attraction is often your psyche's desperate attempt to make the past come out right. This is the sacred trick of the unconscious. It will create illusions, fantasies, obsessions, not to torture you, but to wake you up, to lead you back to the origin of the wound, to force you to see what you have been blind to, that you have always been searching for your own abandoned heart. Carl Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." But to do that, you must reclaim the parts of yourself you gave away in exchange for love that never stayed. You must return to the moment, perhaps decades ago, when you first decided, even silently, I must change who I am to be loved. That was the fracture. That was the exile. And now, here you are carrying that exile into every relationship, calling it passion, calling it fate, calling it love. But it was never love. It was a survival strategy. The truth, the aching, liberating, terrifying truth is that emotionally unavailable people are not the ones who broke you. You broke yourself, piece by piece, to earn love that should have been given freely. And now, you have the chance to become whole again. But wholeness doesn't mean perfection. It doesn't mean you never feel pain again. It means you no longer abandon yourself when someone else does. It means you no longer make their absence mean something about your worth. It means you finally stop waiting to be chosen, because you realize you are the one who chooses. And this is the paradox of the great inner journey. When you stop chasing love, you find it, not because someone else arrives, but because you do. You find it in the way you speak to yourself on lonely nights, in the way you hold your heart when it wants to beg again, in the way you set boundaries not to punish others, but to protect your own peace. This is not the stuff of fairy tales. It's not glamorous. It won't always feel good, but it is real. It is divine, and it is yours. In the stillness that follows heartbreak, in the silence left behind by someone who couldn't love you, there's an invitation, an opening, a whisper that says, this is not the end. This is the beginning. Now, at last, you can meet yourself without distraction, because only when the ghost is gone can the soul step forward. Only when the pattern breaks can the person emerge. And only when you stop looking outward do you finally remember you were never unlovable. You were just living in a world that never taught you how to love yourself. So here is the final truth. Healing is not about finding someone who finally stays. It's about becoming the one who never leaves. It's about recognizing that love was never something you had to perform for, or suffer through, or chase across emotional deserts. It was always within you, waiting for you to turn inward instead of outward, waiting for you to speak your own name with tenderness, waiting for you to reclaim the child who believed she had to earn it. Carl Jung's work points again and again to this central idea that the unconscious seeks integration, that all of your longing is a map pointing not to someone else, but to yourself. And so if you walk away with anything, let it be this. You were never addicted to people who couldn't love you. You were addicted to the hope that this time the story would end differently, that this time love would be enough to change them, that this time you would finally feel seen. But now you know that story was never yours to fix, because your healing was never waiting in someone else's arms. It was waiting in your own. So let the ghosts rest. Let the fantasy die. Let the old self fall away. You do not need to be chased, or proved, or chosen. You need only to return to your heart, your wholeness, your sacred self. That is the truth. And once you know it, you can never unknow it. You are not half. You are not lacking. You are not broken. You are the one you were waiting for. Now choose you.